Alrighty, we are now here all together, all five of us panelists, or I guess you could call it four panelists and one guy running controls. But we're here to talk about the 2013, the second Hokie Stormchase in 2013. And tonight we have a little bit of a change. We don't have students as panelists. We have the trip leaders, which is going to be a great discussion, and we're very interested in talking about this particular trip. So what I'm going to do is just real quickly introduce people. On my screen, it's left to right. It's probably reversed on your screen. That's the way it works on Google Hangouts. And I'm going to introduce them and ask them to talk about themselves a little bit, where they're from originally, what degree or degrees do they have, and what institutions were they granted from, and then what are they doing currently, current job or location or educational pursuit. So I'm going to start on my left with Dane Webster. So if you would just kind of answer those questions for us.
Okay. Do I need to share my screen here, or can you guys see me?
Go ahead. Just talk. We'll hear you.
Okay. Sorry, Google Hangouts is new to me. I'm a Skype person. My name is Dane Webster. I am the director of the Creative Technologies Masters of Fine Arts program at Virginia Tech. I'm also a senior fellow within the Institute for Creativity, Arts, and Technology, which is a research institute looking at the intersection between the arts and design with science and engineering. I'm originally from Utah. That's where I met one of your other panelists. I went to Weber State University for my undergrad in fine arts, and I went to Washington State University for my master's in fine arts in photography. So photography is my background, but I do computer animation, visualization, and I've gotten into a little bit of coding, and have done some work related to this trip doing that as well.
Okay. And also, too, I should ask you the question, this was not your first Hokie Stormchase, right?
This was my second Hokie Stormchase. I was very excited to go. The first one, not being a meteorologist, but kind of an amateur lover of storms, I was excited to go, but I had to be persuaded by one of your other panelists to join. But I had a great time on both trips.
And what year was that first trip?
Oh boy, 2011?
I think it was June 2010.
2010?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Somewhere on there.
Second, right? Yeah.
And that voice you heard there answering that question was Dave Carroll, the next one over on our my screen anyway. So Dave, I'd ask you those same questions if you would answer those for us.
Well, I guess I'm the scapegoat, if you will, in terms of the whole Hokie Stormchaser thing. I'm an instructor in the Department of Geography, meteorology instructor here at Virginia Tech. Did my undergraduate work here, my graduate work at Mississippi State, and have been leading the Virginia Tech students on storm chases officially as a course since the early 2000s, but actually taken students all the way back into the early 1990s. And I'd like to thank every one of your panelists, including you, Chris, for all your help over the years and leading some of these trips with me. Every one of you all have an awful lot of war stories and long miles on the road, and I sure am appreciative of all your help.
You bet. You bet. All right. Well, next we have, to my right, is Jen Henderson. So, Jen, if you would talk about yourself a little bit.
Sure. So I'm a PhD student currently at Virginia Tech in the Science and Technology Studies program. And I am actually interested in meteorology, but not necessarily the science of meteorology, but the study of meteorologists and forecasting itself, and especially the weather warning process. So I came to that actually on one of the chases in 2008. Dave let me join with him and Kevin as an interloper, a writer who was interested in learning about the culture of storm chasing. So I joined in 2008 and found that what I had sort of been interested in as an amateur all along was something I wanted to study more in detail. So before that, I had a master's degree in English and an MFA in creative writing, former from Kansas State University and the latter from Goucher College, and I spent almost a decade teaching creative writing and humanities classes. And I was a nonfiction writer. That's how I joined the Stormchase in 2008. And since then, I joined the 2010 Stormchase, I guess, in June with Dane when I convinced him to help me drive, because I am not the machine that Dave and Kevin and Chris are in terms of driving all day long the whole trip. And then this last trip in 2013. And currently I'm at NCAR, actually, in Boulder, Colorado, doing my dissertation work. And I'm working with the forecast office, the National Weather Service forecast office here.
Cool. Thank you, ma'am. And last on the panel, but certainly not the least, is Mr. Kevin Myatt. Kevin, why don't you fill us in a little bit on your background?
All right. I grew up in tornado country in northeast Arkansas. I went to Arkansas State. My degree is in journalism. I moved to Roanoke in 1999. Took a job at the Roanoke Times. A few years later, the weather blog and weather column that I do at the Roanoke Times kind of took off. So that's part of what I do. I do some editing work as well. As far as this Stormchase, my first trip was 2005. I went as a kind of an embedded journalist, sort of like Jennifer, just sort of kind of went on my own there. For some strange reason, Dave hauled me back in for 2006, and I've gone on at least one trip every year since. So I'm up to 11 now in 10 years.
Woohoo!
So does that mean you're experienced or a glutton for punishment?
That's a subject for debate.
I gotcha. I was just doing a little bit of tweeting there to let folks know some things. But all right, well, what we're going to do is the format for this was going to be similar to what we've done in the previous Hangouts talking about storm chases, but except instead of me leading everything, each of our panelists is going to lead a particular day's discussion leading up to the kind of the culmination almost of the trip with the Reno tornado. What I will do is I'll kind of bring us to the point where I'll turn it over, and then we'll do that, and we'll be able to share some pictures and talk about what happened. So, and anybody feel free to jump in during the discussion if you have something to add into a particular day's events, because we all, as we all know, we all see it through different lenses and through different aspects, and we certainly want to give folks the benefits of our experiences. So. This particular trip, as I said, this was the second Hokie Stormchase in 2013, and we actually left Blacksburg on Monday morning, Memorial Day that year, and that was the 27th. And of course, we usually meet in the mornings and try to leave about 9 o'clock or so, and we started our trek westward. Given the way things were looking and the fact that this was the second trip and it was going to be later in the year, we were kind of hopeful of being a little further north in the northern plains possibly. Didn't work out that way. So we'll talk about that as we went. We headed out, and I've got on my notes here that we traveled just a hair over 750 miles that first day, and did an overnight in Columbia, Missouri that Monday night. And of course, we did our typical evening planning meeting, and in the morning final planning meeting the next morning to decide where we wanted to go. On that Tuesday, that would be the 28th of May, the day after Memorial Day. So to discuss the events of that particular day and where we went and what happened, and to lead the discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Henderson.
Excellent. So I'm going to disclose upfront that my memory for places and cities and distance and events is not the still track that you all have. So I'm going to be talking about it more. I guess I'll mention some of the geography, but my main focus, you'll recall I was doing some ethnographic work while I was on this trip, so I had you all sign consent forms to be part of my study. And I was trying to understand how students formed expertise along these trips and how they interacted with the expertise of the instructors. So this particular day, as you said, we started off in Columbia, Missouri, and we ended up in McPherson, Kansas. Am I right about that? So that's a long drive. This was the infamous retrograde tornado day. And for that chase, I started off driving and realized very quickly that I didn't want to be in the driver's seat for the heat of the drive, so I turned it over to Dane. So for the majority of what I'll talk about, I was in the back seat with the students, and I pieced together later what had happened during the drive after talking to you all. So my perspective on this day is sort of from the back seat and from the students' point of view. And I'll just sort of say that it was interesting because this was our first big chase day, and that the students, from my perspective, I had Ryan and Stephen and Pete and Jason in the car, and you know, they were pretty new at this, and it was interesting to watch the students kind of gear up their confidence and also their understanding of what was happening outside. So we saw a lot of back movies as they learned to sort of say what it is they thought was happening. So I think from here we got on the road. It's a typical kind of chase day. It seemed pretty moist and warm outside. We started heading towards Salina. I believe we ate there. We had some PB&J, and then we were checking the different computers, and the students were kind of all hanging out. There's a great picture I'll show you later of the students hanging out in front of one of the convenience stores waiting for storms to pop, which I think is one of the more typical images that depict what storm chasing is all about, is waiting for storms to pop.
Right.
So it seems like the action really started around 3:30 or 4:30 as we were driving along I-70 trying to figure out what to do and how to get ahead of the dry line. What was interesting from my perspective is in the back seat of the car, all the students have their cell phones out and they're looking at radar scope. Now there's a couple students seated in the second seat up ahead who are looking at, you know, the laptop computer, but Ryan's sitting in the back with me making all these calls about what he thinks is happening, and Dane and I are encouraging him to get on the CB and sort of say what he thinks is happening. So it was interesting. Cell phones were an interesting part of this chase, I think.
Right. One thing I failed to mention, turning it over to you, Jen, is that if I'm not mistaken, all of the 13 students that were on this trip, this was their first storm chase.
Yes.
And this was obviously the first day of the chase, pretty much. So this is brand new experience for every one of them.
Absolutely. And so when we finally pulled over, and I can't remember where this was, where we saw that LP starting up before the infamous tornado was behind it, we got out of the car, and to watch the students' faces as they're standing in the inflow of that first supercell, that sort of stands out to me as one of the benchmarks of the trip, where I think it was that moment that it was real for people that they were chasing, and it was real for them, probably what they had studied in the classroom and seeing it on the sky. Oh, we've got some pictures popping up.
Yeah, there's some pictures popping. That's one I took with the vans in the background. This was the mini-me supercell that was a little bit ahead of the one that we were waiting on. I didn't have I have a video, but I don't have the picture of the inflow from this, which came from the right on pictures and extended probably a couple of miles off to the right. It was pretty huge.
Yeah. So what was going on from your all's perspective from the driving point at this? What do you guys remember about driving? Because I'm in the back, and so I don't have any recollection of the decisions that are being made.
Well, I remember, we proceeded east on I-70 because we were looking at satellite, and the cumulus field was clearly more agitated a little bit to the east of Salina. And so we didn't cheat east very far because we wanted to be fairly close to the dry line. At the same time, there was a storm in northeast Kansas that was about, 40 miles to the north and east of us that went tornado warned, and it took off towards the Missouri border area. And we decided, that's moving away. We're going to hang back because things were firing further to the south and west. And when the storm went up close to Salina, and it was actually, I think, just southwest of Salina, we moved north off of I-70 so that we could intercept it about a half an hour later. So we were actually playing for position about 30 minutes down the road, and that's where we ran into the small LP storm ahead of the main storm that actually produced the retrograding tornado.
Okay, it looks like Dane's pulling up a visualization that he did of this drive with the...
All right, here we go.
Yeah, so what are you showing here, Dane?
So the retrograde tornado is this one right here in the center, the lone one by itself above McPherson. And we had driven out, as Dave was mentioning, towards Great Bend in this. So there was some activity here and here, but we ended up looping around those multiple sides of this that retrograde tornado, and this is where we had that shot. We all got out with that LP and took pictures. So what was driving what I remember was that, you know, we were trying to get back around to the south of that storm, and we just assumed that it was going to be, you know, taking this northeast trajectory, and it just never moved. And it just how it affected where we were trying to position ourselves was definitely an anomaly from any other storm I had been on.
Well, one of the curious things about that storm was the precipitation shield began to expand, and if I remember correctly, it blocked one of our routes that would have allowed us to move around to the southern flank of that storm more quickly. So on the graphic that you're showing there, Dane, it actually shows us having to drive a little bit further to the east before we hit I-70, and then we tried to blast west to make it, but the precipitation core enveloped some of our better routes, you know, and it's on top of the hill. I clearly remember, you know, especially the last van, you were able to actually see the wall cloud in the back of the storm. You could actually see it, and yet we couldn't get to it. Extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
What I remember about this this day was it's just that we saw that great little supercell, that mini-me supercell, and yet you know, on any other day that would be a great chase day. But because this one retrograde tornado was circling back on itself, and we were in position northeast of it, like we should be most of, 95% of the time, we missed, the big show, and everybody else seemed to get a picture of it, and we were 20, 30 miles northeast. And like Dave said, we were on a hill, and you could start to see that wall cloud. And sometimes I wonder if we'd held on 10 more minutes, could we have seen that from some distance? But we just played it the way we normally do, and this time it was not really the best.
Yeah, it was. We played it like we normally do, but it was an abnormal situation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know that from the students' perspective, and I don't know how it was in your guys' band, but it didn't seem to me that they necessarily understood that it was such an anomalous sort of thing. I mean, I'm looking at my field notes here, and I have somebody saying, we're pretty much making a circle around the entire storm. It's like a wolf pack circling its prey. And so there's this sense that we were closing in. And then a little while later, somebody was saying, is it normal for a storm to stay stationary like that? Because they could see on radar that it was just sort of spinning, and I don't know if they saw that it was retrograding. So I think they were starting to question it, but I don't know that from like a chase day perspective if they saw this as anomalous until afterwards. I don't know if you guys had a sense of that from the students, but that's what was happening in my van.
I don't think they were clenching their teeth or gritting their teeth at the lost opportunity as much as we were.
Yeah, I know that particular day with the watch that was issued, and then the warning that actually indicated that the storm was projected to move to the east northeast or to the northeast at 15 knots or something like that. Never happened.
Never happened.
So it was more of a bust to us than it was to the kids, I thought, because the students really seemed, that beautiful LP supercell, it was gorgeous, but it just, it's kind of like, it's like today, New York City got 10 inches of snow and it's a bust, but that'd be a big snow at other times. It's the same thing here. Your chase day quality is kind of viewed on what you leave on the table, and we left that big stationary tornado on the table that day, and we got a good consolation prize, but still, it irks me to this day.
Well, I think one of the things that all of us as leaders often have to take into account that our benchmark is probably significantly higher than most of the students that have never seen a Great Plains supercell to begin with, and so it probably bothers us more perhaps than the average storm chaser that joins us that hasn't seen any of this stuff.
Yeah, I would say that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, that's exactly correct. I think in terms of what we do, and I'm trying to do a screen share here. This was one of those days where if I can get back to here we go. If I can screen share it. This was one of those days I think that as you said, that we were not really impressed with what we saw, but we forget that the students hadn't seen pictures like this.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I was just going to say that I think the Mamatis is probably one of the most memorable events from that day.
right, and this was actually before we got to the mini-me supercell too. This was like the first thing that they had actually seen that was associated with a severe storm, and there was a lot of oohing and awing going on with this. And I remember thinking, you ain't seen nothing yet. So, anything else that anybody can think about that day?
Well, you know, I kind of come back to the whole fact that, you know, after, and I know this is probably true for each one of you all too, that after seeing so many storms, you know, I'm not necessarily so amped for that up-close tornado action as much as I am for the overall structure of the storm. And so my goals and in all of this have actually changed over the course of the years. Where, you know, seeing a tornado is certainly the icing on the cake for me, and seeing it, you know, from a relatively close perspective is always great as well. But just to be out there to experience the Mamatis, to see the structure of the storm, and we have to remember that day our forecast was spot on. We were there within a few miles of the storm and just couldn't maneuver around adequately to get to the action. And, you know, had we been there, we would have been there with 100 other people next to the interstate and 100 other cars. So I'm not sure it would have been what we would have considered a quality intercept anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dane.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I was going to say it was our first encounter with, you know, we pulled into a convenience store early on as we were backtracking to Salina, and talked to some of the local people that wanted to know about what we were doing, and they were really friendly and cordial to us because we were from Virginia Tech, and they had remembered 416, and they they were sharing their experiences with severe weather, and it just struck me we had several things happen that day and continued on where we had a very warm reception from the people that live out in the plains.
Exactly, and I think that's something that we try to emphasize to the students is that, you know, people obviously driving around in 3 vans with these whirly things on top, we're pretty visible, but we're also, and Dave makes a good point about this, you know, we're also ambassadors for Virginia Tech as well as ambassadors for pretty much the entire weather enterprise, if you look at it that way. So, you know, how we treat people and how the information, you know, with the openness we have for them. I remember on this particular chase day, we were trying to maneuver back to where we could get to see the business end of the storm. And one place we stopped, a deputy sheriff came up. And so he came over to my van, and I said, "Oh, hey, well, we'll open up the side van. Let's show you the radar, so you could see what's going on." And he asked a couple questions, and then he took off to do what he wanted to do. And you know, and just people want to know. You know, if you can give them information and be a good ambassador, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I'll also just note that I was impressed that this was the very first chase day, and the next time that we chased, the students seemed pretty well geared up. I mean, it doesn't take them long once they're in the vans to sort of teach each other and understand how to work as a team in those vans. At least in this chase group, they were really great about that. So it was pretty impressive to look at them, you know, how quickly they learned to navigate the storms, how quickly they learned to get on the CBs and make calls. Their confidence sort of increases more exponentially than linearly in this trip. So that was pretty impressive to see, too, that by the next setup for the chase, the second chase day that we had, many of them were good to go.
Yeah, I think it helps a lot to have had action the second day out. So.
Yes.
Alrighty, well, we did kind of circle around and looked at the business end of the storm a little bit from south of the interstate that day. Weren't able to see a lot, and we wound up. I've got in my notes here. We stayed that night in McPherson, Kansas.
Yes.
So we did our wrap up that night, that evening in the hotel room, and then did the morning meeting the next day. And to talk about the next day, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dane.
So, like Jen started her statement saying that she was, she has a different focus, kind of a social science focus. For me, it's certainly about the storms, but it's also about the geography itself. It's something that's one of the reasons I go out, is to be out in the plains. And as Dave said a minute ago, some of these students haven't seen a Great Plains supercell, and a lot of them on the second day got a huge taste of just the Great Plains themselves. As we left McPherson and wound down into the Oklahoma Panhandle, there were some gasps from students, and it wasn't about the sky, it was about the landscape itself. Stark and barren and rolling hills and pretty open, and I think some of them thought they were on another planet for a little while.
Dane, I got a picture up of us meeting in McPherson here.
Okay.
I don't.
How do I bring that up?
No, he's sharing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it up on the screen for him right now. Yeah, there's Dave kind of conducting a parking lot meeting, and you can tell it's a little chilly because we have our jackets on that morning.
Yeah, it was
windy though.
Yeah, it was very windy that morning. I remember because of the wind, Dave was very excited about possibility of what might happen with the day. But I don't remember the particulars of the setup. I was more focused on where we were going to drive and how to get there. But from there we just wound kind of southwest, I guess, towards the Panhandle, and we stopped a couple times at some pretty sketchy little gas stations, and we got a few raindrops here and there, but the sky opened up in the early afternoon, and we were starting to, I'm not sure if we were playing with the dry line, trying to figure out if we were really going to get some action or not, but we ended up in Follett, Texas, which is in that far corner of the Panhandle of Texas. Am I remembering that correctly? You guys stop me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right on there.
Again, thinking about the people there, when we were at that gas station, I was really conscious of, we're this Stormchase group, and how would the local population respond to us? And this big burly cowboy drove, into the gas station there, and he walked right up to us, and I thought he was going to give us a little, we're not happy to see you guys, but he said he was thrilled to see us because he was hoping they were going to get some rain out of the whole thing, because it had been so dry there. So we waited at Follett, and let's see, I think I have, let me try to screen share this real quick.
And one other thing about that statement about, there's been many times that people have come up to us looking for, hey, confirmation it's going to rain, and because it's been so dry out in that part of the world for several years, and that on this trip and I think on the prior 2013 trip affected some of when we were trying to deal with dry lines. The dry lines were actually stronger and further east than we thought they were going to be, so we had to adjust for that.
So can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So this is just outside of Follett, as we kind of pulled off on one of these dirt roads, and we're grouping, trying to figure out where we were going to go. A picture at that little gas station as we were waiting. I think Jen took this picture. I was driving most of the day, so we were flipping with cameras. And I don't know if people will be able to see because of the resolution, but we're in that far corner, and at this point we're racing down, trying to get as far as we can out in front of the storm to see what we can see, while also being conscious that we might very quickly need to move to the east as these things started to line out on us. The story I always tell about this chase day is we were on that drive trying to intercept and get in front of what turned to be a really nice shelf cloud. Those Texas roads, it's 70 miles an hour, and but they're little two-lane roads. And at one point we were heading down, and a storm chaser who was not obeying the rules, I'll say it that way, pulled off the side of the road, but did not pull off far enough, so his tail end of his car was still sticking out in the road, and was taking pictures as a semi came the other direction. And it was one of those on the tight road where, even though it logically doesn't make sense, I actually shrugged my shoulders closer together as if to make the van a little bit thinner, so we went past this guy on the side of the road and the semi coming the other way. So it's it's a reminder that it can be dangerous out there because of the driving, and that other people need to be courteous in getting off the road and those kind of things when they're storm chasing, because that guy almost caused us some problems.
And as I recall, he did that more than once.
Yes, you're right.
We were playing tag with him for a while. It was really frustrating.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I was just remembering, you mentioned chasing this storm. If I remember right, we were expecting more discrete kind of storms, and it turned into more of a squall line setup. Something was missing that day, and so we didn't really have a really good opportunity to do the discrete cell kind of chasing. We ended up just getting in front of that squall line and kind of playing tag with it. But I'll let you continue.
You know, that happened multiple times on both of those trips in 2013, and I wonder whether perhaps the dry line, the lifting along the dry line was perhaps a little stronger than normal, and it was ballooning up storms more in a linear fashion, and splits and mergers would produce the lines faster than what was originally being forecasted.
Yeah, it could be. In fact, I went back to the beginning of my write-up for this, and the title I finally chose for it was Keep Heading South, mainly because of the squall lines. But the other titles that I tried and threw out were things like Back Off, The City's Too Close, Oh No, Not Another SPC Moderate Risk, or maybe even We're Really Done with Squall Lines.
So here's a picture of us out in front of that shelf cloud. I'll click through some of these. So we were rocketing south, and then turned, as this got close enough, we made a turn to the east, trying to figure out which little town we were going to stop at and try to get cover. So here's a little picture after the meeting of the minds to figuring out when we should go as students are taking pictures. Again, kind of that full expanse.
All right, that was an awesome shelf cloud.
Yeah. So even watching that structure kind of wrap around to the north of us, and of course this last view is always reminds me of the first trip that I went on, where we had a similar view, but there was a tornado hanging out behind one of our vans when we were close to Beaver, Oklahoma. But the fun part of this ending that day, we got to Route 60, and we went to Arnett, and we figured, well, we needed to go a little bit further, and we got to a town called VC, and we looked everywhere in town for something to cover the cars, the vans, and we couldn't find any shelter. So we made it to Sealing, Oklahoma, and that's where we pulled in to the gas stations. We're able to get some cover right before the hail took us over.
Right. And I'm actually showing this shelf cloud picture that I took because I was impressed by just the extent of it. But I remember being at that gas station, and several of the students in my van wanted to get out and experience the shelf cloud passage.
Yep.
And as soon as the wind and the rain and the small hail hit, they were back inside my van.
Yeah, I was just going to say a little foreshadowing here for our discussion of the 31st, but I think at this point students were still interested in punching the core and having it hit us and being part of a storm. There was a lot of that sort of excitement and thrill-seeking, I would say, in the first part of the trip, where, in my van there's a lot of discussion of hail and lightning and wanting to see more, wanting to experience more directly. So that all changes, of course, but this day definitely, I remember students wanting to hang out as the shelf cloud passed over.
And that was a pretty neat day in that we were on an east-west road. Essentially, the squall line, the shelf cloud was following behind us, moving from west to east. So we hopscotched with that thing for quite a while, and we could blast out ahead of it. But eventually, it's just started gaining. When we had to go through small towns and slow down, it was just gaining on us. So at some point, we figured out that we're going to have to just go ahead and find a spot and let it roll on over us.
Yeah. Yeah, that was. I felt like that was a really successful and exciting day, chase-wise, because we were able to stay with that storm for quite a while, as you were mentioning. It just finally caught up with us, but we definitely got a chance to really experience that for quite a while.
Yeah, and being undercover, well, there wasn't really any concern with anything major with it, so it was just kind of a neat thing to see the gust front roll on through, and then the horizontal rain and hail come in.
Yeah.
And just from my field notes, there's an interesting exchange here that I think is pretty funny and indicative of how we were thinking. And we're driving to Enid. Kevin comes over to CB and says, "So Dave, maybe you can explain why we didn't see what we thought we should have, or what we thought would occur." And Dave says something was missing. And Kevin says, "Well, that was vague." And then Dave goes on to explain, we were talking about that in our van. Maybe the extensive cloud cover kept the heating down in the Cape that was forecast wasn't actually what happened. It's totally different than in McPherson this morning. If you'd asked me then, I'd have said I was sure there'd be tornadoes, that it felt like a tornado day. And later Chris says, Kevin says, "It'll be interesting to see how this weather affects the setup tomorrow." And Chris says, "That's the problem with a moderate risk day. I rest my case." So a little post-mortem discussion there that's pretty fun. I think that's actually part of my favorite part of the chase sometimes is listening to you all have these conversations over the CV where you're assessing what has happened, what might happen, and reminiscing about different days. That's always part of the chase for me.
Well, Jess, go ahead, Dave.
Those stories typically get taller and taller as the night goes on, especially after midnight.
Yeah.
What most of the students don't realize is that we're talking to each other and recounting these stories to make sure we stay awake while we're driving.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a.
Catherine Prosov, that's gone on some of our trips, has told me she goes to sleep by those stories. So maybe it's a lullaby effect too. So, or she kind of sits there and sits quietly while we were telling these stories up and down the road.
That's funny.
So anything else on that particular day?
I'll just wrap it up by saying that. So we went to Enid and up to Arkansas City in South Central Kansas, but we got a really nice lightning show. I remember to the south of us for a good stretch of the drive, which kept me awake, kept some of the students awake. I think that's something they're not used to, being able to see that far out into the distance and see a great lightning show that you see out in the plains.
Right. Okay. Well, the next day we have is Thursday, May 30th. After overnighting there in Arkansas City, we decided to motor south from there. So to discuss the events of this day, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Kevin.
Well, it was kind of a stormy night in Arkansas City. Nothing severe, but it thundered and lightning and rain, and we were clearly in the cool sector, though it was cooler where we were. And one of the interesting things that I remember about the next day, headed south, we were headed south towards the Guthrie, Oklahoma area, north of Oklahoma City, and it was pretty clear there was going to be severe development that day. But one of the most interesting things that I remember that day is when we're driving south in Oklahoma on the interstate there, somewhere south of Blackwell. Suddenly the windows just steam up for a second.
Yep.
Dave and I were on the radio at the time, and Dave was kind of like stopped in mid-sentence by it, and that was really a neat experience for the students because we actually crossed a boundary. And that's we talk about boundaries all the time. We actually crossed one, and so it became a real thing to them. It wasn't just this line on a map. It was something real that we've done this on some other trips too, just to hit this boundary of the cool air and the warm, moist air. It also told us we were headed the right way because we wanted to be in the warm and moist air. So we headed on down to Guthrie and kind of hung out there a while. It's the northern suburbs, kind of what you would say is maybe the northern edge of Oklahoma City, kind of metro area. Sometime, it seemed like it was a little bit of an early initiation, maybe 2-ish. Is that right?
You're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. Stuff started to. I'll draw one up here, pull one up here for you. Let me see. The storm started firing to our west. I've lost. There we go. It wasn't very long at all before we saw the wall cloud. Pretty obvious there. You can even see the inflow jet and kind of the beaver tail kind of cloud there. And I remember it probably wasn't 15 minutes till this thing, when the storm went up, and we saw this. And I remember we drove. There was a nice gentleman we kind of drove off the road, and there was like a little industry he had, a little private industry, and he just welcomed us and told us all about the tornadoes he'd seen around there, and as we're watching about 2 different cells going up. But the odd thing about this early part of this chase day was it was kind of suburban. It wasn't like in the country in the open. We were kind of dodging mini malls and little strip malls and housing developments and stuff. But of course, these storms were headed northeast, and that took us east of I-35. And that kind of turns into no man's land in a way. It's like chasing North Carolina. We had trees and hills the rest of the day. I'm sure y'all remember that. How difficult it was to follow these storms and get good viewpoints on them, because it was almost like like where Chris chases the Piedmont of Virginia. I mean, it was not much better terrain.
I felt right at home.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. But,
I know early on, Kev, as we were, just to the west of Guthrie, west of the interstate, the storm produced such good structure. I fully expected an early tornado out of that. I was kind of surprised that we didn't get a tornado while we were in the Guthrie area proper, because it did for a while look very, very good.
Indeed. I got a picture up of us pulled off on some gravel road, dirt road somewhere. Is that picture showing up okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got there we are, all on this muddy kind of road, looking out over the fairly open spot here. I don't remember exactly where that was, but we kept on that storm, and it finally it did actually produce a tornado. It's not one of those tornadoes that you just go super wow about. I don't even have a picture of it. Did anybody get a picture? It was we had a wall cloud that kind of drifted behind the trees, and just briefly this tornado came down, funnel, and I guess the only way we really knew it was a tornado was the people close to it said it touched down.
Oh, yeah.
I've got a picture of it, but I don't know if I've got it on this computer.
This is the only one I've got, is the one I've got up here. You can see the funnel there between the 2 guys, and apparently there was a touchdown behind that tree line. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got it a little further along when it's the cone extends down below the tree line. And I don't think I have it on this computer though.
Okay.
So after a while, we had to give up on this storm, simply because we were so far east, and we were in the hills and the trees, and we were actually kind of on the western fringe of Tulsa by that time. Or at least it was 30 minutes away. At least we were getting kind of sort of in the Tulsa suburbs. So we headed back west, and there was actually new development, and that produced what I would say was kind of the signature pictures that we got from this trip. Was it Perkins, Oklahoma, I think, somewhere east of I-35?
Just south of there, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll call up my version. There's probably 15 versions that are better than this one, but
it's such an amazing storm.
Yeah, that was one of these things where we got out of the vans and my jaw just hit the ground. Like, I couldn't believe the structure I was seeing. It was so awesome.
That's one of the prettiest storms I've ever seen.
And we had those stack plates, and they were rising, and you see the rotation, and that was a really low wall cloud dragging the ground, and really a neat. That was to me that was the prettiest storm we had in the entire trip. That was
and we were the only ones there.
Yeah.
A perfect viewpoint.
And you remember when we turned south out of Perkins, I think. Wasn't the Dow and the whole team was sitting there at a corner just kind of waiting, and we went right by him, and about 4 or 5 miles south of there is where we stopped and saw this.
Yeah. Tiv was there,
Yeah, the Tiv and the Dows were there, that's right.
Of course, they're only looking for tornadoes usually, so they might not have been all that disappointed. But it was a heck of a show, and really a beautiful storm. And it's those kind of experiences that make these trips what they are.
Right. Well,
after
Kevin,
that,
just to interrupt for a second, going back to a Weather Brains episode about maybe a month ago or so, they were talking about. They were interviewing one of the Mets. I guess it was a TV Met and the local NWS National Weather Service Met there in the Tulsa area about an EF2 tornado that went through the southern suburbs. And I went back and looked at the timing, and then looked at the trajectory of this storm we just looked at with that stacked plates. And I think it was this storm that caused that tornado later on.
I think you're right. I think I remember that. Even that day, there was some discussion about a tornado in the southern part of Tulsa or something.
Right. I think it was an EF2 that wound up something like that.
But was that the first storm we were on? The one we gave up on, probably?
No, it was this one. It was this stacked plate supercell that looked like it had the right trajectory.
Okay. In any event, after this, there was a kind of a storm behind it we kind of toyed with for a while, but it never did really. If I remember right, it kind of poofed out or something. Kind of didn't really. The storm we were on, kind of moved on and didn't look as impressive. And then there was kind of another one we kind of looked at for a minute. And it didn't look too impressive. So finally,
I think some of them were repeatedly moving over already rain-cooled areas, and they were just having some trouble getting their act together.
So finally, we ended up dropping out kind of early for a chase day, and we had time to go eat Mexican food back in Guthrie, and we went to Enid. I remember we had trouble with getting hotel rooms that night. There was something lost in translation, and we had 2 rooms or something, and Dave had to run and get some more down the road. But those are the kind of things we run into on a chase trip sometimes, kind of on the fly. But we stayed in Enid that night. We couldn't get rooms in Enid the night before, so we were in Enid in north central Oklahoma, and we were obviously going to be setting up for something that looked pretty large the next day.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say that this day for me was really interesting because, in the past when we've chased, I think Dave said it best, we all want different things from the chase as we've seen, different features of storms or seen tornadoes and stuff. And I think this was the first trip where I sort of sat back and looked at how other people responded to us as chasers, and not just how we would talk to them. There were a lot of people pulling up beside us as we were sitting there watching this storm, asking questions about what we were seeing and were they in danger. And if you remember, Moore, Oklahoma was just a few weeks prior, and so you've got a very intensified sort of atmosphere in terms of fear and the public perception of risk and the sort of stuff that's going on that sets up for El Reno and what we saw and what happened during that storm. But I could definitely see that there was concern on a lot of part of the residents who were watching us drive around with these mesonettes on top and wondering something like that on their horizon, looking at that enormous storm, are they in danger? And I think that just kind of was the first time I realized how much people see chasers as indicators of their own risk.
Right. And I think especially, and I'd have to say, the fact that we had the mesonettes up there on top, it kind of gives a little bit more ring of, not sincerity, but the fact that we're a little more serious about the chasing. We weren't just a casual, hey, let's go jump in the truck and look at the storms. They knew we were out there for reasons.
Right.
Anything else about that day you want to wrap up with, or?
Well, that's pretty much it. It was a very good day as far as, especially with the really pretty supercell that really made the day. The tornado that we briefly saw, I barely remember, and I remember that it's often the case. A lot of people presume the tornadoes are the attraction. They can be when it's that really kind of Wizard of Oz kind of backlit, perfect funnel, or we're really close to it. But more times than not, the tornadoes we see are kind of hard to make out, kind of fuzzy, and may even disappear behind trees in this case. And the structure of that supercell was what made that day.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now we move on to the day, okay, and I call it that because it's a watershed moment in Stormchase history. And of course, it affected us directly in a number of ways. I think, as Kevin indicated, we stayed that night. That was Thursday night in Enid. Friday looked like it was going to be really good. So we had our morning meeting, and then we jumped into vans and headed south. And at this point, I'm going to turn the leadership of the discussion over to our leader, Dave Carroll.
Where to begin? And some of you all can fill in the fuzzy details. I've been on so many of these, and it's embarrassing to say that even a Moore day or an El Reno day, some of the details for me along the sides of the road are just kind of dropped. They all run together. But I clearly remember that morning we were talking, and we actually talked to the students about the risk of a fairly significant day that day. It seemed like everything, the parameters were lined up to create some pretty dangerous weather. And we also, I know all of us got together early, and we made the call that said that, if we're going to interact with the Oklahoma City area, we're not going to interact with the Oklahoma City area. We're going to have to steer clear of that, because clearly we had thought that might come into play, and unfortunately it did. Same with the Moore day. The one thing I remember in the pre-storm environment is we had traveled south, and we had pulled off. Can't remember the gas stop, but we had pulled off at one point, and I actually pulled some of my van crew together as I was gassing up my van, and I told them, I want you to qualitatively remember what this feels like, because this feels like a severe weather day out here. And it was very much the same with the Moore day on the first trip that year. There's some qualitative types of feelings that you get after a while, and it felt like that was going to be a big day. I remember when we were actually along I-40, and we were waiting in El Reno, in that area. We were pulled off into the little kind of strip mall area where there were several other chasers there, but we were just kind of taking a break, waiting for the initiation time to the west of us. And it was hot, humid, it was windy, and storms started firing, and they were concerning because they were firing a little bit north of I-40. And at that point, we were all looking at the radar, and I think every one of us came to the same conclusion, that they seemed to be lining up. And at that point, we felt like, okay, maybe we don't want to go to these first initial storms, because storms to the west, Oklahoma City suburbs to the east, we're in between the two. Doesn't sound like a recipe for a very good afternoon for me. So we opted to hang back, and we waited for a while for additional development to occur. And that did occur further to the south and west. Any of you all at that point add anything else up to that point that day?
Yeah, I remember sitting there and debating on, we knew we weren't going to chase into Oklahoma City because the storm trajectories were heading into that direction. So we were waiting on what would go north or south. We knew we were going to go north or south on out of that area, and I remember dithering quite a while, waiting for something to really show.
And I think that the one thing that I remember ahead of time was the fact that the first radar, the first reflectivity that started popping up, and then you see the cells lined up north to south. It just seemed to us, I remember discussing, I can't remember with whom it was, but I remember discussing the fact that, gosh, this seems like these things are going to line out, or maybe not give us much room to maneuver successfully around them, because as you head up towards Kingfisher County, there are some road network issues up there, and so we didn't want to get into a situation where we had limited escape routes at that point in time, and we had multiple storms to deal with. So one of the reasons why we hung back for a while to see how that panned out and whether they did line out pretty quickly, which they did, and then try to figure out, whether we should proceed a little further south.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting because we were in that Walmart parking lot for quite a while, and some of the students, the typical waiting for storms to pop kind of activity, throwing balls and frisbees around, waiting, killing time. But there were a couple of really dedicated students who didn't leave the vans at all and kept watching with you all what was going to happen. And the rest of the students who were kind of hanging out, steadily we saw a number of people stopping by our vans because there was kind of a bunch of other chasers in the parking lot, and residents were driving up and asking what we were looking at. I remember a couple students in my van talking to somebody and encouraging them to make sure that they had their shelter accessible. I mean, I think there was a sort of realness again to the students about not just the chase, but also kind of the responsibility that comes with being out in the plains and being marked as somebody who's a chaser or, doing research, however we look to people. But students having to give kind of some advice about, I would say weather aware, keep your eye to the sky, make sure you've got your shelter accessible. And then the PDS came out. And I think students, some of them were sort of shocked that this was the gravity of the situation, that there was a PDS.
Right, and I remember looking at the stuff being put out by the National Weather Service office in Norman, the wording of the PDS, the wording of some of the other things. Basically, they were saying it kind of reminded me of the language that the National Weather Service pulled out when Katrina was ready to hit, coming into the New Orleans area, and it was basically don't travel in this day in Oklahoma. It was don't travel after 4 p.m. Find your safe spot. I mean, it was obvious from the wording that there was something big was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just standing in the parking lot of the Walmart and watching these cumulus towers, they were going up so fast and then shearing off just over and over again. And it was so sticky. I mean, a lot of these days that we do these chase are so, they're almost cool and windy. Especially this last year when me and Chris when we were out there, where every day was cool and windy, we were in jackets, but this day was so hot, so sticky, and you could see these towers climbing and then getting sheared off, and you just knew that when one of these finally popped through the cap, it was going to be something really, really, really enormous and really strong, and that's exactly what happened.
Right.
Well, and as the time went on and we proceeded further southward, the cell further to the south and west went severe warned, and then had confirmed baseball-sized hail with it. We decided that at that point that might be a pretty good. It's kind of an LP type cell. That might be something that would move into a more favorable environment, perhaps with more moisture further to the east. That might be a more isolated cell that would be safe to go after, rather than trying to fight some of the storms that were closer to I-40 and then the Oklahoma suburban areas. And I remember making a pretty conscious choice that we weren't going to play with the storms when there was the potential for traffic issues or anything like that. It's not in our game plan. And so at that point, to pull off further to the south, there really wasn't a whole lot of question in my mind. Had I been by myself, I may have lingered and maybe played tag, hopefully safely with some of that. But as a part of a larger group, we have a larger responsibility. And I think I don't regret the decision at all. We were in perfect spot where all the action ended up occurring, and we cheated a little bit south only to come back north so we catch the end of it. But even at the end of the day, when we were in Chickasha, the entire system was sagging, growing, back building to the south and west, and it was overtaking Chickasha while we were there as well. And I remember we didn't have that much time before we had to exit and dive south as well.
Got a picture up of the lone cell that we went after that was south, the one that was kind of LP, and then it fell apart basically. We had some hopes for this cell that we could find something out of the metro area that we could chase, but I think that big cell in Reno that was spawning the big tornado there, I think the anvil material probably overlapped this storm and just cut off its heating, and it died.
Yeah, that southern storm was warned, but you're right. It basically choked itself off, and this was the picture. One of the pictures I took when we had moved back to Chickasha up north, and this is the back end of the El Reno cell. You can kind of see the lowering there, and then but if you look here, this was all the traffic that was now proceeding out of the Oklahoma City metro area.
And what was going on was that one of the TV meteorologists in Oklahoma City had advised people to head south out of the storm, which is just mind-boggling to me. Why you would issue that advice? That's contrary to anything that is taught for severe storm, for protection from severe storms. But and so you suddenly had almost this evacuation of Oklahoma City headed southbound, and we got caught in the middle of that. Fortunately, we were far enough south that we could kind of go with the edge of it and get out of there pretty quick. But some people were trapped, all those cars, and they were overtaken by the storm.
And there was a significant flash flooding threat that was occurring with those storms as well. Prolific rain producers are training over the same areas, and there were some virtually catastrophic roadway flash flooding that was occurring. That was definitely a threat to the lives of the people that were on the road. And as we were in Chickasha, I was paying attention to the storm. We were close. We could see underneath the face of the storm, and we could only imagine what was happening just a couple of miles to the north of us. But as that began to encroach on us, the traffic increasing, I started getting to the point where I was watching the traffic more than the storm to make a call, and I can't remember which one of you I told first. I said, that's it, we're out of here. And as we headed back east on the road into Chickasha, we were going against the grain of most of the traffic, but the traffic had actually started increasing in both directions. And at that point, I began to wonder and worry a little bit about our ability to escape to the south of all of that. And the edge of the storm had come really close to us. It was kind of gusting out a little bit on the southern flank, and boy, that was getting really, really close. And I was thinking, we were only probably a couple of minutes from getting hailed on at that intersection where we finally dove south, and we're permanently in the clear at that point.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. I think I was the one you told that, hey, get everybody together, get into vans, because I remember standing there watching this storm and with you watching the traffic and thinking, this is not normal. This is something we really have to be concerned about, because when you do have 3 vans full of people, I mean, just the logistics of moving them, getting them out on the highway and getting safe is tough. So. Jen, I know you've probably talked to some folks about this event. What do you have to bring to the table?
Well, a few weeks after we got back, I was invited to be part of a service assessment with the National Weather Service. So my colleague Laura Myers and I went out. Venkita Brown, who's with NOAA, went out before us, and then we followed back behind her, and we interviewed members of the public, including emergency managers, radio broadcasters. We could not get an interview with the forecaster who issued the warning to drive south, but we wanted to sort of get a sense of whether or not people got the warnings, what kinds of warnings they got, and how they reacted and why they reacted the way they did. And it's interesting, Dave, the flash flooding, very few people got that warning. I mean, they were so focused on the tornadoes, not that the warnings didn't go out, but people were so focused on the tornado warnings that they didn't know about the flash flooding until, in many cases, storm shelters started filling with water. And so you had people who were taking shelter who were noticing the effects, but they were responding to the tornado warnings, not the flash flood warnings. So that was a predominant. So now there's an effort in the National Weather Service to sort of look at how do we handle multiple hazard events. There was a family that was killed while sheltering in a culvert, who didn't necessarily understand that there was a flash flood warning. So that was one thing. Another thing is, it was curious that in talking to people in both the public and the emergency managers, that advice is often given to drive away from storms if you don't have shelter. It's just not framed in the moment that the tornado warning is issued. It's something about, if you don't have a shelter, you want to drive away from the storms before they initiate. So during a watch, for example, if you know that you're not going to have a place to shelter, then it's safe to drive away. So this was advice that people in Oklahoma have been fairly familiar with, but it just in looking at the context of more Oklahoma and how close it was on the heels of not just El Reno, but a series of storms that had occurred in the Oklahoma City area, people were reacting with a heightened sense of fear. And so you even have stories of people who will, off the record, tell you about how they got in a car and drove away, and they're in the forecasting community. So it was not just members of a panicked public. It was, there were some emergency managers. There were some people who are much more weather savvy that didn't have shelters, and it just became kind of an overwhelming sense of fear.
I seem to remember hearing Janice Bunting of the NWA making that same statement, because she lives there in that area, and during the El Reno event, she got kind of skittish after the Moore tornado. So it wasn't just the average citizen that was kind of not up in arms, but scared of what might happen.
Sure.
Of course, what was going on while we were south was this 2.3 mile wide tornado. Was that correct? At El Reno, the largest.
Right.
It's been the largest, at least, that we've officially measured. And of course, Tim Samaras and Carl Young and Tim Samaras, his son Paul, were killed. Famous storm chasers. We've met Tim Samaras the previous year on our storm trip, and so we didn't know about that till another day. But we knew that we had heard some, or saw on Twitter and stuff, some chasers had run into problems. They get caught in the storm. They were real close to the tornado. They almost didn't get out, and unfortunately, these people did not make it, and they were among, I forget the number killed. It was about 10 or so total in the El Reno area, and also including some of the flooding deaths. But we were so close to this very deadly situation. It could have turned out worse for us if we'd hung around too long.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think in hindsight, and looking at some of the graphics of where chasers were relative to the El Reno storm, 3 days after we returned from that trip, I'm out on the golf course with my son, watching him play, and my life had returned to normal. And I still thought about the El Reno event, but that at least for me at that point, I began to realize that the storm chasing is important for me. I want to expose the students to and give them as much of an experience and as useful an experience as we can. But at the same time, my priorities perhaps might be different from especially some of these freelance chasers that are much more interested in getting that, the adrenaline rush type of video. And when you're taking that kind of a chance, at some point, fate may catch up with you, and the odds may catch up with you. And for me, returning back from both of those trips with the Moore tornado first and then the El Reno tornado, it was kind of surreal for me to actually be able to go back to my normal thing at home. And it's a memory. It's not necessarily a faded memory now, but I don't know how much of a watershed event this will actually be in the chaser community. As we all know, these types of things wear off, and you hope you learn from people learn from it, but you never know.
Well, I do know that the period of time, because we didn't go home, obviously, right after the El Reno tornado. We did take up some time. We traveled out to our famous Super 8 in Guyman, in Guyman, Oklahoma, in the Panhandle that we liked, especially with the sausage biscuits for breakfast, and the sausage gravy. But the pattern kind of settled down a bit. I think we did chase one day and saw some kind of halfway decent stuff, but to me, and I will confess that Dave and I were the only two that had gone on both trips that year, and by this time in the trip, I was approaching like 10,000 miles of my body, and I was tired. and not just tired. I was weary, and that time in Oklahoma gave me some time to gain some perspective on what we had just done, and what we had seen, and helped me to process it. Because the fact that, and I remember having a discussion in Dave and Kevin's room with the students about this tornado and about the fact that there were deaths, and to kind of give everybody a chance to express how they felt or ask questions.
What I remember about the staying in Guyman is the year before the 2012 trip, the second one, that's where we met Tim Samaras at, right there at the Super 8 at Guyman. Right. And I remember coming to breakfast, the continental breakfast, nice little room downstairs, the first morning after we were there, and I just learned about his death. It was about 24 hours before it kind of got out, and I came down there, and I remember the exact seat he was sitting in the year before at the continental breakfast in Guyman. I actually ended up eating my breakfast in that seat, thinking about how this man, that we'd met and shared some laughs with the year before, and now he was gone because of kind of a quirky storm turn. He was doing what he normally does. I can't tell that he was doing anything more dangerous than he normally does. It was just he was trying to put the probes in front of the tornado, and it made a kind of a weird turn, and they were blinded, and they got caught. And that just really hit me that he was here the year before in Guyman, here at breakfast. Many of us talked to him, and now he's gone. And that like you say, that like couple of days, 3 days we spent in Guyman, we did chase once. It was pretty good, but it really just kind of helped us. We had one total we called it hiking, a 0 day, where we didn't go anywhere, and we I even took an afternoon nap. How often do you do that on a Stormchase? And it was a good day just to kind of soak in a little bit and kind of come to grips with what we just experienced, like Chris said.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is it's kind of surreal. Out of Guyman, we had continued to chase some storms, got some incredible lightning shows out of some of those severe storms out that way. All of this had just taken place in Oklahoma, the tragedies that unfolded, and then the next couple of days we're still out in the field doing the same things that we've always done. So a little bit of a surreal feeling to that as well, considering what had just happened, just 24, 48 hours before.
Though, it was interesting because when we were driving away from Chickasha and we were sort of heading south trying to find somewhere for the night, a lot of the students were, at least in the van that I was in, were pretty shaken by that. And, talking to them just then saying, this just isn't right. It's not right to be chasing when things like this are happening to people. And they felt, I think there was a sense of mixed emotions about being out and chasing, especially on the 31st. But I felt like that kind of carried through a little bit afterwards, where the tenor and the strength of the tenor, I guess, of the conversations was a little bit different. It wasn't quite the desire that I felt students had at the beginning of the chase, where they wanted to experience something or wanted to punch a core, but it had tempered a bit for the rest of the weekend. I don't know if you guys felt the same thing. The other thing I'll say is I've never seen so many people get phone calls from their moms at the same time as we were leaving Chickasha. There was a, sort of a reverberation throughout the vans of parents calling to check on students, so you knew that their parents were watching the storm unfold, and so it wasn't just the students themselves that were seemed to be experiencing maybe a change of heart or a little bit of a different perspective, but the parents were sort of informing that too by calling to check on them to make sure they were okay.
Yeah, when we're running APRS, it has a way of alarming parents sometimes when they see their position on radar and assume the worst.
Yes.
I got a picture up of the students. Well, since we're talking about them at Palo Duro Canyon, we took in that, one of our things we like to do when we're out there. But that's all the 13 students that were on board this trip. So good look at them.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was a good crew too.
It was indeed, and they were certainly battle tested in this. Our trips year to year, trip to trip, vary dramatically in the amount of activity they get. And the interesting thing about the 2013 chase season for Virginia Tech was that both groups had very similar trips. They each had a major kind of landmark kind of storm with Moore and El Reno, and had had lots of running from things and lots of structure, a similar number of days in the field. And I guess Chris and Dave would know most about that. They experienced every bit of it, and I could tell the wear that were on you guys by the time we got to Guyman that night.
Yeah, but I'm old, so the wear shows quicker. Alrighty. Anything else on either the El Reno day or any of the time we spent in Guyman afterwards processing what happened?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to remember, the service that we're providing to the students, many of these students are our future forecasters. They're our future researchers, and so, seeing these things up close and personal the way they have is part of the deal. And in many cases, I know Kevin knows that some of our chasers from the past have actually become motivated, even switched from one interest in one type of weather into severe weather, and are very much interested in pursuing the research into things to try to figure out some of these puzzles relative to severe weather. So it's a service that we're providing in terms of their education, and so in addition to gathering any kind of data in the field, it's primarily an educational mission. And I think I appreciate all of you all's support over the years in that venture, because without you all it wouldn't be happening.
Well, in addition, or along those lines, Dave, one of the things I think that I have seen in watching the students, as Jen has talked a lot about on this particular trip, is when we've taken trips through areas that have been hit by tornadoes. For instance, I remember one of the 2012 trips, we went through Joplin a year after the Joplin tornado hit. And I remember obviously it was impactful because I remember a lot of the details, but watching and listening to the students talk about that and how it might affect their careers in terms of the importance of forecasting. And then I'll fast forward to this past year, 2014. Kevin, after we finished chasing in Texas, Kevin took us through the damage path in Belonia, Arkansas, about 4 weeks after an EF4 went through there. And that made a big impression on the students. And again, it's not to the students weren't hanging out the windows taking pictures, or it wasn't an obvious thing. It was, hey, this is why it's important to forecast accurately, and I think that is a big part of the education.
Agreed.
Totally agree.
Okay. As far as the overall outline, I've got some just kind of wrap up and final comments, unless we have some advice for the new Hokie Storm Chasers. But one of the things I wanted to ask Dave about, he mentioned to me before the broadcast that he had just posted some stuff on the 2015 chase. So Dave, you want to elaborate any on that?
Well, just trying to work out some of mainly the graduate students right now, and which chases that they're going to work this particular year. But yeah, we've got the undergrads all set up, and again, a couple of alternates that still have yet to be figured out according to the balance of the graduate students that'll be joining us. But it'll be interesting to see. I just checked the CPC today, and the latest El Nino forecast is for it to die out here in the next within the next 2 months. So we'll probably be in ENSO neutral conditions. I haven't tracked the wintertime precipitation. I know they've had a couple of fairly moist storms here recently and some snowfall in the southern plains. I have not had much of a chance to track some of the patterns through the winter to see whether they're regaining some of the ambient moisture that they've certainly been losing over the course of the ongoing drought out there. Hopefully that'll continue to moisten up a little bit.
Which took a break. The drought took a break while Chris and I were out in the southern plains this past year.
It wound up being MCS City there for several days. So, okay. Anybody have any closing thoughts before we wrap it up? Dane,
well,
you got anything to bring up, Dane?
Well, I just want to reflect back on the Reno day. and for all the for the tragedy and the intensity and the drama of that day, I remember the decision time being a really calm time, actually, where, as Dave mentioned earlier, certain things were taken off the table as far as decisions early on. So I don't remember it being a really intense decision about, well, should we do this, that, or the other. It was kind of like, look, these are our options, and we're not going to do a certain, set of things, and we're not going to put ourselves in danger. So even though it was, in hindsight, remember the adrenaline of kind of the latter half of the day when we were kind of looping around to get close but still stay distance away. There wasn't a lot of intensity about it, and I think that's one thing that people should understand about this trip and what Dave's set up with all of you, since you guys have gone so much, is that there is a little bit of adrenaline about it, but there's also a threshold where, like, this is not acceptable to put ourselves in significant kind of danger. I always remember really that was a calm decision time when we were going through that. I'll never forget that.
Okay.
And just to add to that, in the interviews that I did after the chase was over with some of the students, one of the conclusions that I sort of drew in my own research is that a lot of the ethic that you all had out on the Stormchase informed the ethic of the students, so that at the beginning of the chase, they had this idea of being really kind of thrill-seeking and interested in punching cores, and they had transitioned by the end into saying things that sounded a lot like what you all would say about, chasing being a two-way ticket and no storm is worth a life. That came out in the interviews of this day in particular. So I think that it's important also for you all to know that the way that you're framing this trip is working in terms of shaping how the students view their responsibility and what ought to be an ethic of storm chasing in general. I could see that at the end in the interviews. It came out very clearly. So kudos to you guys.
Okay. Kevin, you got any thoughts?
Well, Dave and I have been doing this so long together, and Chris has been doing it a few years with us, that we sometimes almost seem like we have kind of one brain there on these things, and that really helps in these critical situations. Is that we're the leaders are on the same page, and by the end of the trip, maybe like Jen says, the students are too. Yeah. And Jen mentioned that students were getting calls from their mothers and stuff. I was getting calls from I was getting tweets and calls, and I couldn't check them on the road because I was driving. And there was somebody that follows my weather blog real closely who called me when we were at a convenience store on the way to the lodging in Lawton, Oklahoma, and was just checking, did y'all make it okay? We've heard all these people have been hit by this storm. So certainly a privilege to be a part of this group, and the way Dave has set the ethic over the years for us.
Right, and I'll throw my 2 cents in here before I ask Dave to give us his final comments. But I just second everything you said, Kevin. And frankly, the reason that I still chase with Dave is because of the way he does it. If he didn't do it the way he did it, I wouldn't be chasing with him. Mm-hmm. So, Dave, how about you wrap us up?
Well, I think the recipe for success for us hinges on the students. I mean, it's, they're immersed in the storms for the period of time that we're out there. And the best that we can do is to nudge them in certain directions, provide guidance for how to ethically chase storms, how to be safe, provide useful information either to the Weather Service, to local law enforcement. And I know all of you all have seen we've got a great relationship with emergency services, law enforcement out there. And that can't remember which year it was. It was one of the recent years where the sheriff told us, hey, if we have storms later in the day, and just give me a call. He gave me his phone number, and he said, we'll let you through any roadblocks that we have. And so I think having that type of mentality going into the chase, and essentially demanding from the students that, yeah, this is the way that we run the trip. And this is the way that you're going to maximize your chance for that round trip ticket back home. And I think that goes a long way towards, solidifying our reputation. I mean, we've even had, places for lodging hold rooms for us because, they've said, you guys are a class act. And, I'm going to set aside these rooms just in the event you need to stay here tonight again. And so those things go a long way. And I think that sends the right message that, chasing can be a sane activity, can be done ethically with the right things in mind. And, certainly the way all of us operate, that through osmosis, if nothing else, the students get it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, then. We've been rambling on not quite an hour and a half, but hopefully we've given folks some things to think about and done a good recap of this trip, which I thought was a good educational trip, and certainly I enjoyed it myself. So I thank each and every one of you for being part of the panel, and hey, we look forward to do some chasing together again.
Yeah, it's good to see you all.
Good to see you all.
All right. So
Yeah,
that's
we'll be
it.
back
Thanks,
out
Chris.
there.